you'd be so kind to just give us an introduction on yourself and your background.
Sure, thanks, Impella. So, hi, I'm Will Scrimshaw. I'm until recently a General Counsel and Company Secretary to a company called Benevolent AI. I've been an in-house lawyer for most of my career now, going into sort of about 3 or 4 different roles in-house. So before Benevolent, I was at Microsoft, and before that, Skype and BT. And I trained and qualified in Norton Fulbright back in 2003. Yeah, spent there about sort of 5 years and then moved in house. So had a quite varied career to date.
Hmm. And what inspired you to move into law? Was it was it someone in your family, or was it an interest that you always had, or did you fall into law as such?
Yeah, no, I've gone very dark. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where I'd enjoyed sort of the economics at school and the sort of the getting to know the world of business and stuff, and law was always an interesting, very broad career for someone who didn't necessarily know from the age of 5 they wanted to be a vet or a doctor or that kind of thing, as the stereotype goes. And so I'd always had it in the back of my mind. The first thing that piqued my interest in the law more generally was I was like a teenage kid and I witnessed a car accident. Just a car running into another car, and driving off without leaving their details. And so I volunteered myself as a witness and ended up going to court to sort of testify, I guess is the right word. And so that whole and actually the guy who'd hit the other car, which I'd seen, got off for various technical reasons. And so it really opened my eyes to the fact that the law was this kind of much more nuanced and kind of complicated thing than maybe you think in sort of as it's portrayed on TV or in the popular kind of press. And so that opened my eyes, not to necessarily want to be a criminal or kind of a criminal from the off, but just in the kind of the discipline more broadly. So yeah, that was the kind of that sort of put it on the radar. And then yeah, it was just some work experience, various different sorts of firms, and it felt to me to be a really good career to start off because there's so many different ways it could go.
Yeah. You actually just reminded me. I saw something quite funny the other day. It was a advert for an American defense attorney, and it said, "Just because you did it doesn't mean you're guilty." Call this
There you
number.
go. So they could have been they could have been defending this person. But yeah, that was super interesting because yeah, I mean you assume, I guess, as a child that justice, if that's right to put it, works in a certain way, and that was just a really interesting experience for me to see how the Crown Prosecution Service worked and that kind of stuff. And so yeah, all very interesting.
So once you finished law school, did you find it quite difficult initially to find a training contract, or were you quite lucky to get it quite quickly? Or
yeah, no. So I did all the vacation schemes. I remember as a second year student when all your other mates are off getting drunk and enjoying themselves. Kind of the lawyers were there, sort of doing their interviews, putting their one and only suit on and that kind of stuff. So no, I got a training contract like while at university, sort of the very standard sort of vanilla process. And so I finished. So they paid for law school, and so I went straight through. Had some time off between law school and started in the January of the following year. So I started at Norton Rose for training, and I went straight through. So that was kind of like pretty standard.
And did you know much about the in-house sort of career path at that point, or was it sort of introduced to you at a later date?
No, not on my radar. When I first started work, not on my radar at all. I mean, so I did my training in the sort of usual sort of selection of seats, and actually I just qualified, and there's that horrible kind of first 6 months of qualifying where possibly the most stressful part of your career, I think, because you know nothing about anything, but all of a sudden they crank up your hourly rate, and you're put out there as an associate and need sort of overnight expected to know stuff. But very early on in that period, to compound that kind of general horror, I went on to secondment it was actually EasyJet and the Easy Group set of companies that Norton Rose did a lot of work for, and Stelios, the sort of quite sort of, I guess, eccentric founder of that empire. And so I went off. It was only sort of a 3 or 4 week period, I think. Sat with that team, did lots of sort of IP and trademark work and stuff, and it just opened my eyes to how interesting law was in a business. So how much sort of more you sort of rolled your sleeves up. I'm sorry, got stuck in, and I think it opened my mind to the variety of stuff. I really liked private practice, but you kind of were, you're asked to do a piece of advice on a discrete issue, and you'd send your memo back or your email, and half the time you never hear anything else, right? You're always like, well, I gave this advice, did they take it? What was the outcome? And sometimes, obviously, if it was a continuing matter, they'd come back to you, but it was just a little bit frustrating when that they take your advice, they'd go implement it. I guess they do the fun part. And so being on the other side really sort of opened up my eyes to what I felt was just really interesting and just much more varied approach to practicing law. So I did a secondment, and I guess that sort of again sowed the seed. And sort of after sort of 3 or 4 years in private practice, I took the opportunity to jump in house.
Okay, so back then, I mean, traditionally, back then it was, people didn't move in so early in their career into the in-house market. So it's quite early.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was about 3-4 years PQE. So I guess it's as early as you'd ever want to be. You're just starting to know something, I guess, to be useful in house. And yeah, I mean, it's an opportunity. I heard about a BT, obviously a big established in-house legal team. And I was doing quite a lot of actually contentious IP litigation work. And there's an opportunity to be actually an IP and commercial litigator at BT. So it was a nice, I guess, transition in terms of my subject matter. And quite rare to be able to do. Well, there aren't many litigation in-house teams anyway, except the very biggest companies. And so it was a nice jump. It's quite a big jump to make anyway. And so I think the fact that I could kind of continue doing very similar work made that jump a little bit more manageable. So I decided to take that. I mean, obviously, big city law firm hours and work-life balance and so forth is also sort of a perennial kind of issue as well. But yeah, so I took that jump and sort of never looked back really.
And would you be so kind, so for the people that maybe are still in law school, or who are maybe sort of just starting out their careers in legal, be able to define what a general counsel is. So if they haven't understood what a general counsel is to date, then you can give them some sort of context on what you think a general counsel is and what it means.
Yeah, so I think it's a lawyer in the most generalist sense, so as the literal title suggests. Like you're kind of a little bit about everything, or you're able to spread yourself across the business and say it's general advisory, legal advisory work across the breadth of the business, from every kind of legal issue that might come up, from an employment claim through to drafting a contract, through to you name it. You've got to really have your arms around it, or you've got to have a team that you can help you to get your arms around it. And so it's not about being an expert necessarily. I mean, happily, you might be an expert on something that comes on your desk, but most times it's the skill of knowing where to find the answer out, or kind of knowing how to apply your sort of general experience, your life experience, and your legal experience to come up with the answer. So yeah, it's that's what I find most interesting. It's the generality of it. It's the fact that every day is different, and it sounds like a cliche, but genuinely you never quite know how your day is going to go and what issues are going to land on your desk. And especially if you work for an exciting sort of technology business or sort of cutting edge business that's trying new stuff, then on top of that, the issues are new anyway. So it's a super interesting process.
And with regards to that sort of first GC role, how did you get it? Was it did you move into that role from that company already, or were you jumping from a senior legal counsel role into that role? And did you experience what I guess is a little bit cliche term, but imposter syndrome?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so the first so the job was advertised, and there aren't that many first general counsel roles that are advertised, and so it was a nice opportunity to. I mean, imposter syndrome for sure. I think it's nice when you get to go in as first lawyer, because people haven't seen a lawyer before, so in some ways they don't know what you're supposed to be doing, which makes life a little bit easier. Although they have their ideas of what lawyers should be, and often they're wildly different or unrealistic. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a big step, because there's no, it's a lonely place to be as the first lawyer, whether you're general counsel or sole counsel or just on your own, because you haven't got people to bounce stuff off, and really nice development in-house community in recent years is the communities that have built up, like Crafty Counsel and Juro and all those kind of different communities to help in-house lawyers do the thing that's missing. But yeah, so it's I mean, it's really exciting. It's great to be able to sort of start with a blank piece of paper and build out a team as you want to do it to support the business most effectively. But it's also a little bit intimidating because it's never been done before, and as I say, no one really knows what to expect.
Oh, that's definitely an interesting viewpoint. I guess from my side, what would you say the key skills that someone that is working in private practice, when they do move in house, they might need to develop that, because it is a very different role. I worked 4 years as a paralegal in house, and I worked at CBRE, and I also worked at a smaller solar fund, and very vastly different businesses. First of all, but secondly was the ability I found was to sort of switch between, dealing with, a managing director or, someone who's maybe in the sales team, and having that sort of dexterity in the sort of personality to not be, too corporate where, they sort of run to the hills, and don't want help, and then sort of, I guess, hide the sort of legal issue that they might be having. It'd be great to hear from yourself what you think that sort of key sort of skills that they should really focus on developing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's putting yourself continually in the shoes of the recipient of your advice, not doing the lawyer thing of giving the advice you would want to receive as a lawyer. The detail, the structure, the kind of comprehensiveness of it. It's kind of like, if you're a busy CEO or a business person in the business, you want a yes no answer, and obviously lawyers need to nuance the answer with a whole load of ifs and buts and so forth. But from a practical perspective, if you've asked a question of a lawyer, you want a yes no answer, as far as you possibly can give one. And if it's a no, it should always be no but. It shouldn't just be no. It should be, have you thought about this, or can you do it this way, or so forth. We used to at Skype have a really nice kind of, I guess it's a cultural phenomenon where there are lots of Estonian software engineers in Skype, and they're sort of, Estonians are known in very general terms for being quite direct, not necessarily conversationalists or kind of. So you'd have these emails that came around to the company which had an Estonian version and then an everyone else version. And the Estonian version was always like no more than one sentence at the top of the email. This is what the email's about, and then there'd be like the content. And in many ways, that's sort of a really nice framework in a legal sense for an exec summary, and then the kind of everything else beneath. And so what I always try to do, and this is like one of the most important skills, I think, is you answer the question that's been put to you in no more than the paragraph. And if you need three pages of context or kind of ifs and buts and stuff, put it in a memo and attach it. But you don't want people to have to search through a whole ream of text for the answer. And you can't sit on the fence, really, even if it's especially difficult if it's a new area where you don't know what the answer is. You've got to give your best. You've got to give an opinion. You've got to come down off the fence, because it's very, again, putting yourself in the shoes of the person who's asked you the question. They don't want to, well, it could be this, or it could be that, or it might be this, or who knows. It's like, well, best guess at the moment, it's really unclear, is this, and why don't you go ahead and do what you want to do, but just remember X, Y, and Z, and we might have to course correct. So I think from a private practice perspective, in some ways you're almost asked for the 3-page memo rather than the exec summary, and it's kind of flipping that mindset so that you're being as business focused as possible.
And from my side, when did you sort of first know that you were ready to take on that sort of GC role? Because a lot of sort of lawyers, they might be sitting at that sort of, 7 PQE and not really sure if, that's the right role for them, or if they're ready. And I guess feeling ready is an important part, but sometimes also diving into something that you feel uncomfortable with at the early days, can actually make you comfortable over the longer term.
Yeah, I think it's a mindset. I mean, as you've pointed out on LinkedIn and stuff. I mean, the General Counsel title is spectacularly unhelpful in its vagueness and the width of the kind of skills and experience it encompasses. So, I think it depends on the business as to whether you're ready. Firstly, as if it's a small business, a massive business, that clearly dictates whether you're ready to make the step up. But it's also, I guess, you have to be honest with yourself about what causes stress in your working day. And if not really knowing the answer to stuff, or having lots of different sorts of things on your plate causes you stress, or if you making decisions autonomously causes you stress, then maybe you're not quite there. But if you thrive on that, I mean, because you can have two different approaches, right? If you thrive on that, and that's what gives you kind of intellectual stimulation and what kind of engages you in your role, then absolutely. I mean, there's never a perfect time, and I think the first time you take on general counsel role, it's going to be similarly to the start of your career, there's a few months of kind of doubting yourself or second guessing yourself, but ultimately, say the client doesn't necessarily know any better, which is always the sort of the thing to take solace from. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking for an epiphany where you wake up one day and say I'm ready, I mean, that's just never going to happen, right? It's always a case of, I think if the opportunity really engages you, or sort of it just really makes you sit up and take note of it, then that's a good sign that it's the kind of business you want to be involved in. And then you probably do well in it because you're interested about it.
And did you have any mentors who were general counsels, or anyone that you'd want to shout out that you think that were really influential in your sort of journey? Someone that you looked up to and or even still in contact with?
I've worked with more senior people throughout my career who wouldn't necessarily give the formality of the role of mentor, but I've sort of regularly in contact with them now in terms of bouncing ideas off, or especially at career junctures, like just sense checking kind of roles and opportunities in a more objective way. So absolutely, I've worked with lots of sort of more senior lawyers and other business people who help in that regard. And then I've also, I sort of do mentoring myself on the flip side. I think it's super important to do that, because you sometimes just do want to know that you're on the right track, and it's always great if someone's been there and done it. And most people are super generous with their time and happy to help. It's just a case of asking.
Who do you mentor? Is it more junior professionals or?
Yeah, I've done a variety. Yeah, mainly more junior lawyers. Just in terms of either sort of coming into the professional kind of just at a sort of junior associate level, or sort of first in-house role, or that kind of thing. But also within the business, I did it benevolent a while back. Different people in different teams, like I guess adjacent teams to legal, like HR or ops, that kind of thing, who are also kind of coming through the sort of through various training programs internally.
I think that's very generous of you, because I think having good, strong mentors, even if you didn't have one yourself, but being one is so important for just the confidence side, that you're on the right track. One of the podcasts I done before, that was one of the sort of major discussion points where, we're really talking about mentors and how they sort of built that confidence for that person to then go on and, really hit on for that GC role. So they were having that sort of debate if they were ready or not. And, that GC said, I think you should leave the business. I think you should go and get your first GC role. I will support you 100%. And, he really took solace from that sort of, someone more experienced than him, giving him that sort of confidence in his ability to then go out there and take on that role.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there's that advert about you always remembering a good teacher, that ran on telly for a long time. And I think similarly, even if you don't have a formal mentor-mentee relationship, I mean, ultimately anyone more senior than you is to a degree being a mentor, just in terms of you working with them. And so I think we can all list in our heads, like, excellent training partners, or people we sat with as a trainee, or people in the business, whether they're not lawyers or whether they're lawyers themselves, who you've learned stuff from. And I've learned a lot from various different people. Some good things, some less good things, but and work with a lot of different sorts of people, not just sort of across the world as well, who've all taught various different things about being an in-house lawyer.
One of the sort of interesting topics that has been sort of put around, especially on the LinkedIn sort of community, is the sort of rise of AI in legal. Where do you see that going in the next sort of 5-10 years with regards to assisting legal teams? Do you see it as a positive, a negative, or any concerns that you might have?
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly positives. I mean, I feel not the pressure anyone puts on me, but a self-imposed pressure is, having worked for an AI company to at least have a view on AI in legal and how you provide legal services in an AI company. I think, I mean, there's the hype cycle, which is well traversed, and I think there's quite a lot of noise about AI. I think what I've learned, and a lot of people have said similar things, is that it's about getting started first of all, because it's kind of otherwise you end up with just a situation of paralysis where you never do anything with AI. It's about starting, being really clear what you're trying to solve for, and for me the biggest wins have always been the least sexy areas where you just get a quick win and you get some momentum. And so my most recent company is not like heavily sales driven, so often some of the best AI legal solutions are kind of they're working on volume contract problems, whether it's automated drafting or just the volume of stuff coming through. And I haven't had that recently, but so where I've had the biggest wins with AI is really just lots and lots of software products have got AI baked in. Some of it's marketing, some of it's substantive. But just using what you've got, I mean, and also getting to where the business is. So, if the business uses certain tools, there's no point in legal coming out with its own bespoke tool that it imposes. So I've used front doors using existing systems like Jira. I've used, lots and lots of different AI tools, whether it's Copilot or Gemini, to review, summarize, take minutes, all that sort of fairly, I guess what I'd say is stuff around the edges at this point. And obviously, and that all works quite well, saves some time, and then you sort of build from there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a big proponent of it. I think there is a lot of hype, and you've got to sort of, I guess, tread slightly carefully in how you deploy it.
I think with the AI topic, there's quite a few lawyers that may be a bit scared that some parts of their role will be replaced. I think I don't think it's going to replace lawyers. I think it's going to make them more efficient. And yes. I definitely think as well with regards to if you ignore it, it's going to be a bit like the internet boom, where people we're ignoring it, but it's going to happen if you like it or not. And it's going to become an integral part of how business is done. And I do think it's going to make people more efficient rather than replace them completely.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, there's that perennial question about how you then train upcoming lawyers who, because it's fine for a lawyer who's well into their career to use an AI tool to synthesize information when you know what good looks like, how to do it yourself. Whereas if you're not doing it as part of your junior years, you don't learn. But then I think, that's always been a sort of a concern and a risk. And I think the way to approach that is to look at sort of junior training in a different way. And so you can see where juniors get really good at prompting the AI in a way that they're much more skill and expertise at that than a more senior lawyer, and so they become the kind of the prompt engineering kind of guru of the team, and just different skills, I guess. But yeah, I think it's definitely got a place to play.
What advice would you give junior lawyers who are maybe considering an in-house move, and would it be something that you would highly recommend, or if they had an opportunity to go on as a secondment if they're working in private practice, do you think they're really important to get sort of a taste for what life is like in-house?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I'd say go for it. I mean, I think sort of anecdotally, I think lawyers seconded from private practice is slightly rarer these days. But yes, to the extent the opportunity is there, for sure. And I think again, it's kind of working out and even just basically writing on a bit of paper in terms of what being super clear with yourself, which might not be obvious, but what really motivates you, what you like, what you don't like. And often that's a hard question to answer because you don't necessarily know at the start or the middle of your career. It's fine. It's easy looking back as to what you and it becomes clear what you like and what you don't. But I think in-house is such a rich and interesting career these days that I don't really see the downside. I mean, maybe you try it and you go back to private practice because you see that a little bit more now than maybe was the case. But I don't think you lose anything. I think you become a much better rounded lawyer as a result.
Absolutely. What advice would you give a younger self with regards to now looking back with all the experience that you've gained, that junior lawyer back in the day? What advice would you give that person from your experience looking back now?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say again, it comes back to being honest about what sort of person. I mean, I think private practice is a very linear career still. It's a PQE driven,
Mm.
seniority based. You sort of, I guess, step based approach to your career to the point of partnership, and then kind of, then you've reached the kind of pinnacle, as it were. I
Mm.
think the thing about in house is it's a very, as you were saying earlier, it's a very rich and varied career, and I think to make the most of it, you've got to be pretty relaxed, which lawyers sometimes aren't by personality trait. You got to be relaxed about the way your career ultimately twists and turns, and so it's not in-house is very much not linear.
Mm.
We touched on earlier the kind of complete lack of consistency around job titles as an example, but
Mm.
an in-house legal role in one company very very different from a ostensibly similar company from the outside.
Mm.
Um, and so I guess it's about just embracing opportunity and um, looking at the positives and the upsides of every opportunity that gets presented during your career, because often it's as much by chance as design. I mean, you can be, obviously it's good to be planful about your career, but also opportunities come up which you're not you have no control over, and it's, I
Mm.
guess, embracing those opportunities for what they are, which is to learn something new, and if you don't like it, to course correct. If you do like it, then great.
Mm.
So I would say, yeah, embrace the kind of wiggly nature
Yeah.
of it, because at the end of the day, if you're enjoying yourself, the how wiggly and meandering the line of your career is ultimately pretty irrelevant.
Mm.
If you're enjoying the experience as you go along, so that's maybe the final thing, is to enjoy it as you do it.
Mm.
I think at the start of career, you're always aiming for something on the horizon, whatever that might be.
Mm.
And I think it's as much about enjoying. It sounds slightly cliched again, but it's enjoying getting there as much as sort of
Living in the moment, and I would agree with that. Especially when a lot of people, they're aiming at that next step, especially in private practice, that next step, and they don't live in the moment of just enjoying it, enjoying the process. I guess with regards to quick fire questions, and I want to ask you some quick fire questions just to get
Sure, sure.
an idea of your thoughts. The first one would be, what legal tool would you recommend the most and you can't live without? That could be even not a legal tool, sorry. It could be a tool that you use on your sort of day-to-day basis doing your job.
Yeah, I think now it's something like Gemini or Copilot, or for either for research or for summarizing stuff that you might put in front of the exec team. Or I think
Mm.
just having that open on your laptop, that's become for me just a habit that's good to form, which is to use it as much as possible. I think it's great for first brushes, first research steps, and just helping you to craft, to get away from that blank memo, blank piece of paper kind of problem, or just to get something down on paper, and it's great for. So I, that's baked into most things people use now, and so I definitely recommend that.
Yeah, one of the ones that I've found is DocuSign. It's just been a little bit of a game changer, just for getting things signed quickly.
Yeah,
And that for me in our business, just getting terms signed. So many clients, they'll just not end up signing their terms, not because they don't want to, but just because it's backwards, forwards, and then it's just one of those things that doesn't get really done. Um,
yeah. You got to print something, sign it physically, scan it.
yeah.
And like life
Hmm.
is just 20 minutes wasted. Yeah.
If you weren't a lawyer, what would you be doing right now?
It's a good question. I mean, I really like being a lawyer, which is not to sidestep the question. I guess it depends whether you have some kind of magical source of funds, or whether whether I need to earn a living. I think the answer is very different. But no, genuinely, I mean, I really like being a lawyer. Maybe it would be something more in the business. Maybe more operational. You see increasingly the connection between lawyers going on to become COOs, that kind of stuff. I could see branching out into something like that. If it's something completely different, if I was just a man of leisure, then I can think of a very different answer in terms of how I'd spend my day.
If you're at a barbecue and someone asks you what you do for a living, what's the sort of biggest misconception of, when you tell them you're a general counsel, that you found?
Oh yeah. So I mean, if you say you're a lawyer of any kind, they'll then start asking you about a parking fine they got, or some kind of contract that they could get some help with from you drafting, which is, you've got no clue. It's nothing to do with you. So I think that the concept that what a lawyer is sort of all knowing. If you are one, then you know everything about every sort of law. It's probably still persists more than you would think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I went to law school. My dad was always asking me legal questions that are, about property and about parking fines as well. So I completely sympathize with that. Uh, what would be the sort of with regards to the rise in the sort of fractional sort of GC role? Do you envision that's because I personally seen quite a sort of rise in that in the last sort of year or two. Do you envision fractional GCs taking a section of work a way that might have sort of been outsourced to private practice? And I don't mean very niche skilled work that would still go to private practice, but that sort of overflow of NDAs and sort of general contracts that legal teams, if it's a sole counsel that's working in-house and doesn't really have bandwidth and is not getting that stuff dealt with quick enough because just the volume, and they don't have budget to hire. Do you see that being a sort of key sort of direction that the legal market might take?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think the alternative legal service provider market and fractional GCs and that sort of area is becoming more mainstream than just a niche. And I think it's got a huge amount of value, especially for a small legal team that I've been in. And when I maybe do it all again, I mean, I think since I last did it and when I do it again, they really come to the fore, and I'd absolutely use them for all the things you talked about. I think there's a huge value out there, and like you say, if you're listing your company, you're probably still going to go to a big private practice corporate city law firm. But like you say, for getting day-to-day volume stuff off your plate, but even some more strategic stuff, I think there are lots of excellent fractional general counsels out there that you can parachute in to solve a quite strategic issue or give them a strategic project to do, which they weren't necessarily. I think maybe interim has come of age as a kind of concept. I think in the past it was maybe for much more niche, and it was kind of something that you did if before we had slightly more flexibility about how we worked. If you wanted work flexibility in your life, you do interim potentially because you could have time off between gigs and that sort of stuff. Whereas I think it's much more broad and just impressive in the offering now. So absolutely,
No, it's definitely something that I've seen being a growing trend, first of all. But the second thing I've also seen is the misconception of what a fractional GC can be. So often they think, it's someone that's going to come in and basically be a legal person in your team. But it can work two ways. It could be that, which is the traditional interim side, but it can also be someone that works externally that you outsource work to, rather than it being someone that's physically there. And there's definitely some businesses out there that have done that really, really well.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously there's a bit of small bit of ramp up time, so they know what your positions are and your playbooks are and stuff. But then absolutely, it's sort of like a wise sage you can pick the phone up to and use much more strategically than just, way beyond just, I guess, classic overflow work, as it were.
I guess just to end the sort of conversation, what advice would you give generally for law students or anyone that's out there that's considering moving into law? What advice would you give them to focus on?
So I think it's a few of the things we covered. It's about, again, the question of what you're interested in is hard to answer at the start of your career because you don't know. I think there's nothing wrong with not knowing, right? I was one of those classic people that didn't know what I wanted to do, and you sort of feel like you should know what you want to do, and there's nothing wrong with not knowing. So I would say that first thing, and then the second thing is kind of like, but if you're not clear, then embrace the opportunities to do as much experience as you possibly get your hands on. And it's quite work experience is quite tricky because it's much more formalized these days, and work placement is often as tricky to get as training contracts, but you don't have to do it in a sort of top tier law firm. I would say just try to get as much and as varied experience across the width of the profession, because to our point earlier, it's a really, really wide profession, even just within the in-house community. So try stuff, and I think that will be very helpful in getting to the point where you say, "Oh, this is for me," or "Actually, I really didn't like that," or so try as much as possible, I'd say.
Yeah, I was going to say don't close any doors.
No.
So one of the things that I found when I was working in house was there'd be so many events to go to, and I would never go to any of them. Not because I didn't want to, but I mean, working in London's a grind sometimes. You finish late, and especially back then, you were traveling on train, and I kind of regret that now, not just going out and just networking a lot more, because you don't know what comes from that. You build really strong relationships, and people that I'm still very good friends with today.
Yes.
There's so much potential in those networking events.
For sure, and I think you raise a good point, not just about the events, but your network more broadly. I mean, as a junior lawyer, I didn't even know what a network was, let alone think about embracing it. And maybe it's pre LinkedIn to show my age, but I think you can start on your network from day one. And I think the key to that, as you say, is going to events, getting yourself out there. No expectations of what's in it for you, but just to kind of be open to conversations, and then good stuff often flows from that in the least expected places. And so it's never too early to start that process.
Absolutely. I'm going to end the podcast there. I want to say thank you so much for your time. I think it's been very insightful, and I really feel that a lot of people will benefit from your experience and I guess your path that you've walked, to be able to give that insight to that sort of in-house career journey.
Yeah, no, great. It was really nice to talk to you, and appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having me on.
Brilliant. Thank you.